What is up, everybody? We are back. This is Hater Radio. My name is Chris McLean. I'm here with my co-host Ian Gibson. How are you, Ian?
I'm doing great. Obviously, I did want to say with what I'm wearing, since we are doing the Florida preview this today. Obviously, want to mention the basketball team winning its third national title this past March. Was truly an amazing run. I know when I'm on here, obviously college football is the big thing, but once it's the off season, I still follow basketball very intently. I remember those runs in 06, 07. The 2014 run was one of my, fondest memories, that Final Four one. And I was like, we didn't know at the time that was Billy Donovan's last hurrah, but this one was absolutely insane. Every game was heart attack inducing, stressful, but they literally picked the hardest path possible to win a national title, and nobody can say they didn't. But obviously, huge congratulations to the team. And yeah, another great season is looking forward to them.
Yeah, I mean, when they beat two-time defending champ UConn, I knew they had a shot. And they played a lot of close games. They came back in like the majority of them, which is gut-wrenching for fans to have to go through. But it just watching them play, Walter, Elijah, all those guys, the bigs, Condon, Chinlu, like all those guys they just played well as a team. And I think Walter's, ability to hit big shots throughout that whole run was immense, because if they didn't have that, I don't think they would have been able to be as good as they were on that run. And it says a lot to what's going to happen next year, because I don't know where those big shots are going to come from. They need someone to step into that role of, being the answer. When you're down like 4 or 5 points, you do need a three to really kind of like, switch the momentum a little bit. And that happened a lot with Walter there. And it's tremendous. It was such a great run. And like, I loved every second of it. It was, I wish they would have played Duke in the championship game. That would have been fun, but Duke didn't get there. And that Houston team was definitely worthy, because they were Ken Palm rated like one of the highest rated in the last 30 years or whatever. So, they definitely deserve to be there as well. And, Florida won the conference tournament in probably arguably the hardest the best conference in the history of the rankings for all those conferences. And, it was tremendous. Like the whole year, like they played a murderer's row of a schedule, and they just kept coming. And they, credit to Todd Golden for, just doing the things needed to make this team go. And, he's in his third year at Florida.
Yeah. It's his third year.
That's crazy. 3 years and already got a championship. I mean, the sky's the limit for them. He's not even like 40 years old, I don't think. He's younger than me. And, I'm excited for their future. Most of the guys besides the three guards are back. Thomas Hall, just the whole, that whole crew coming back. There's a really high belief that they could go back to back. I think they can. Just tremendous. It was great run. And, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're not here to talk about basketball. We are here to talk about the Florida Gators football 2025 season preview. We're here to talk about the emergence of a team that has been mired in mediocrity for years, since, that shoe was thrown on that fateful day against LSU in the fog, when the CFP hopes went flying across the field, much like the leather of that shoe. It dissipated as it went to the floor. And, it's been rough as a Florida Gator fan. Me and Ian are huge fans, obviously. And it's just to watch it go from the highs of the Urban Meyer era to the last 15 years, the lows of just, it's been brutal. You know, they've been 4-7 seasons and a lot of 6-6 seasons lately. But I will say, when all looked lost last year, when it looked like we were on the verge of, firing Billy Napier and starting the head coach searching committee again, they really turned it around. It started in that it honestly started in the Kentucky game, because it was after Graham Mertz had went down in the Tennessee game. Lagway took over, and they started to really build momentum. They kicked the crap out of Kentucky. They played well against Georgia. Lagway got hurt. They had them with like 3 or 4 minutes left, a tie game. They got blown out by Texas, but that was about the low point, because as soon after that, they really kicked it into high gear, and Lagway came back. They beat LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State in succession, and went from potentially not going to be in a bowl game to winning 7 games, then beating Tulane in the bowl game in Tampa, and finished 8-5. I think most people starting last year would have taken an 8-4 season. I had predicted that, so I wasn't really like outside of the norm of being in that type of season prediction. But no, I just feel like this team really rallied behind Billy Napier. I don't know if you saw the Netflix
I was just about to
documentary.
say, yeah, I watched that yesterday, Any Given Saturday.
Yeah, it was great. Shout out to all those guys and gals involved. Andy Staples was involved heavily. Alyssa Lang with SEC Network. Paul Feinbaum as well. It showed what Billy, the players took it out for him, and they believed in him. And I think that went a long way for just making that effort, because, when they lost to Texas, it looked brutal, but it was also, Aiden Warner that had came in for quarterback was not very, he hadn't had that much experience, and he didn't know what he was doing. And it just was like, he's just not that capable of a quarterback. I mean, no offense to him. He's not a 5-star all world like DJ Lagway. And you could see that. And it was rough going through, but I still love the way they finished off the season. It looked tremendous, and it gave hope to this year. That's honestly, and I think that's what was the biggest point, was like the first 2 years under Billy Napier, there were some glimpses that felt like they were on the right path, but then there would be a lot of terribleness at the end of these seasons. This year or last year, they got to a low point, but they finished strong, and they were, the proof of concept, like I have always said, the proof of concept of, them being a winning program. He showed that at the end, especially LSU was on the verge of the playoff potentially. Ole Miss definitely was. If Ole Miss won that game, they were basically in the playoff, and Florida shut them both down and won those games. And, it completely showed that they're capable. I've been talking a lot here, Ian, but I want to hear some of your thoughts. What did you think of last year coming into this year, of the mindset of behind the team, the brand of Florida football right now, since probably that moment when, that end of the season there?
Yeah, well, you definitely knew, going into last year, I was pretty pessimistic, to be honest. I said, at best, they would win 4 games, because that schedule was absolutely brutal, and you probably got a lot of my texts, as everybody else did. If you watch the Netflix series, those might have been some of my things that they posted about Billy Napier. Yeah. I remember seeing that. I was like, yeah, I remember those. But I remember, and I was at that Texas game. That was the most fun funeral I've ever been to. But that was the thing that was the most telling. And Paul Feinbaum said it best in that episode about the Gators, is it was one of the most miraculous things he had ever seen. It was one of the most crazy things I'd ever seen. If you were to tell me that day I was in Austin after Florida lost 49-17 with Lagway injured, you just lost back-to-back games, one of them to Georgia, and now you have to play LSU, who you haven't beaten since 2018, and Ole Miss, who's a top 10 team. Yeah, I wasn't optimistic. You can go watch the old episodes, but somehow, some way, they found a way to win. And I think most of that came down to really, I think if you look at those games, the defense especially really came out of its shell. Now, all intents and purposes, Florida finished 15 out of 16th defensively in the SEC. It was still not a terrific year. Playing devil's advocate, they did a lot of those statistics were ballooned by the Texas game, the Georgia game, the Miami game, and the Texas A&M game, where they were thoroughly blown out. At the end of the year, they were locked in. They were, the coverages were much better. They were having to make sure the receivers were playing in front of them instead of, the typical cover 2 zone, and they weren't getting as beat as badly. And they were finally getting takeaways. We've been saying that for 5 years? If they could just get those takeaways, kill those drives, and, they were a real bend, don't break example. And of course, too, Lagway wasn't perfect, but he was, and I still stand by this, the best freshman quarterback I have ever seen at Florida, and that includes Tim Tebow. Tebow's freshman year compared to Lagway's, Lagway looked way more comfortable, way more in the zone. Now, he still made mistakes. He turned the ball over, forced it, especially I remember the Kentucky game, and ironically, the Gasparilla Bowl was probably his worst showing as a starter. He just didn't look like he was there. But those are freshman mistakes. What he has to do now is take that step forward along with the rest of the team. He's got a veteran offensive line coming back. This is the best offensive line Florida's had in probably a decade. You got Jake Slaughter, Austin Barber, anchoring the side to protect Lagway. And he's going to have time in the pocket to make those deep passes. It's about going through his progression. If somebody's not there, either, you check down, take it yourself, or, the worst thing you could do is try to make a big play that turns into going the other way. But he did show, too, if there's a nothing play, he can make something out of it. LSU, Ole Miss, that Florida State game as well, pocket would collapse, players would be covered, he'd find a way to scramble out of the zone, flip it to Mizell or somebody, and they would get a first down. So the creativity, he's a real, creative player there, and that's something Florida desperately needs. I think, what I would say, going into this season, it is a totally different era as it was going into the last 2 years with Billy Napier. There's a lot of hype, a lot of optimism, and rightfully so. They are ranked in the preseason for the first time since 2021. And they've been, going back and forth between the rankings, either 13, 19, something like that. For me, though, cautiously optimistic is how I'm viewing going into this season. Yes, they finished fantastic. I could not believe they, had those wins against LSU, Ole Miss, thoroughly beat FSU, and then got a great bowl win in the Gasparilla Bowl against Tulane. But still, I feel like it's similar to how I'm in the movie business. If you have a good ending to a bad movie, sometimes that's all that needs to happen. If you just have a good enough ending, you can make up for a lot of, bad stuff. I feel like there's a lot of people not remembering that there were really bad moments still last year. The Miami game, Texas A&M, Tennessee. I'm going to throw a mulligan for Texas because everybody was hurt. But once again, I will extend an olive branch. That was at the beginning of the year. We didn't even know what team Florida had, and they found themselves halfway through, literally when it looked like everything was falling apart. But still, I'm cautiously optimistic because while they have proven they can win those games, the schedule is literally the same as last year. They're flipping, the home and away. So it's not easy. If anything, this year's schedule is harder because their one layup game is Long Island University, the first game of the year. Then they got to play USF. We follow USF. they beat them by a field goal last game, and that was with Scott as head coach, who was a terrible head coach. So that's not an easy win. And then they got to go down to South Florida, play Miami. They haven't won in South Florida since, I think, 1984, 85. They haven't won in Miami in that long a time. And then you start SEC play. So there's games that they can win.
The LSU games first.
Yes.
It's USF, LSU, then Miami. No, but I get your point. And I totally agree. I mean, like, you know, this team, I think a lot of what it was okay, you could kind of like throw out the Texas A&M and Miami games because, you know, they were not indicative of the rest of the season. Like, you essentially dug a huge hole and it looked like they were not going to get out of it. I mean, we talked about it on our show after the A&M game. We both wanted Billy gone. I know you've been really suspect of Billy ever, like, since the beginning, but it's like I was still on the fence. But after that game, I said he needed to go. And like you said, it was a miracle. They went from losing those games convincingly to, you know, at that point, I think they were 1-2. So after that, they went 6-3.
Yeah.
That's pretty darn good, you know, considering the schedule that they had. I know the schedule. Well, let's bring it up right now since we're already talking about it. So, you know, much can be said for the fact that, you know, the SEC scheduling right now is, you know, it's pretty tough. You know, like in years past, you know, when Florida was playing East teams, they had Missouri, they had Vanderbilt, they had South Carolina, Kentucky. They only really have Kentucky this year. It flips next year and they get all those teams again. So, again, the schedule will probably be easier because then also they don't have USF and Miami on their schedule. They have like 3 cupcakes next year outside of FSU. No, I don't know. As far as the schedule goes, I think the front half of the schedule is really tough because you have LSU, Miami, Texas, Texas A&M basically right in a row. There's a bye week in between all that. The back half, outside of the Georgia game, the rest of it seems somewhat manageable. You know, Kentucky, Tennessee, FSU. I'm not the biggest fan of what Tennessee is doing. You know, they lost Nico. I'm not sure about Aguilar as far as quarterback. I haven't heard that he even has the job. So, like, we won't know until probably midway through how Tennessee is actually going to be doing. Well, I know they play Syracuse first game, so maybe they'll get shown what they're capable of right away. Their defense, Tennessee, will be fine. But FSU, I'm still not a believer of. I know, you know, they're bringing in Gus Malzahn as OC, but, you know, Thomas Castellanos, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to make of him. He got benched at BC. I know that Bill O'Brien was like trying to change up how he was playing. So that is not necessarily great. But you know, he did pretty decently the year before. He had like, I think, over 3,000 yards total between rushing and passing. So he's capable of doing a lot. But he is a bit turnover prone. He has better talent than he had at BC. I don't know. What games of the 12 do you see that stands out for Florida that seem to be like the most important for Florida to win?
So I would say for me, the biggest one, and this is going to be how telling, regardless of what happens, if they win or lose at LSU, that following game against Miami, that's going to be the real, like, okay, how are they going to do this year? Because say they do beat LSU in Baton Rouge, which they haven't done since 2016, by the way. And if it's a night game, they haven't done since 2009. So,
wow, it's been that long.
Yeah, it was Tebow's senior year, and I can't believe I remember that.
That was that 13-3 game after the concussion.
Yeah, got the concussion.
Yeah.
So regardless of what happens in that game, if they honestly, before I tell you the big ones, the ones where I'm like, okay, if they're gonna drop ones, Texas, Georgia, Ole Miss, and I would probably say like LSU and maybe A&M would be like, depending on how those games go, I would be like, okay, fine. I won't be happy, but I'll be like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
So LSU would be in that camp. But if they win, good. Miami's going to be the biggest one. They have to win that game. Because if you beat LSU, you cannot go back to Miami after they just blew you out and pantsed you in your own home.
Yeah.
With the quarterback that was, let's be real, kind of coasting by at Georgia that still beat you. You can't do that. You have to, like, if you're going to be the best team in the state of Florida, you have to beat those teams, and you have to beat Miami. So, and then if they lose to LSU, same thing. You have to bounce back, and you have to beat Miami. And Miami is what I've always said, that was the struggle with Billy Napier, was winning those rivalry games. Miami is a rivalry game. I wish we played them more. So he's got to win these games. Yeah. So I think Miami will be the biggest one. The Texas A&M game, like I mentioned, Lagway will be going back to his home state in Texas. I know it's not like Texas is big, so like where he's from is not close to College Station, but still home state, it would be like a homecoming. Gators, I mean, that's Texas A&M has had their number at times, and that's a tough place to play in general in College Station. I know they did win in Napier's first year, but still never an easy trip to go down there. And that's after the Texas game, which is easily going to be their toughest team they play this year. And then towards the end, I would probably say like at Kentucky too, because that's after Georgia. And again, Florida hasn't won in Lexington since Trask came in 2018. So yeah, it's been a minute. So I would say those are the three games: Miami, Texas A&M, and Kentucky, that are going to really make or break this season. Because as good as Florida finished last year, they need to be showing that they're making progress. And I literally said this in my article. I know it sounds crazy, but if those games I mentioned, LSU, Texas, Georgia, and Ole Miss, yeah, you get bit in the ass and you lose. Depending on how, fine. I understand it. Most of those games are on the road. Georgia and Texas are like we're in the SEC championship last year. Fine. But you can't have any other excuses after those games. You cannot have a game like you did against, Miami or Texas A&M where you could have won, or Tennessee where you could have beaten them and you got in your own way. So you can't be upset to like Mississippi State, Tennessee, Florida State. You have to win these games.
Yeah, I mean, like the gotta have games are Long Island, USF, FSU, Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi State. And potentially out of that means I think that's 6 games. So if they win 6 of those, they only have to really win 3 more to have a playoff shot. And I mean, it is reasonable that they could go 3-3 against those other 6. But that also means they have to go 6-0 against the ones that they should be favored in. And I think they can go at least 5-1 in those. But I would be hard pressed to say they go 4-2 against the 6 games that they're not going to be favored in. That's just too much of a task. I can see 3-3, but then that leaves them at 8-4, and 8-4 is going to be outside looking in. I think my most important game, I think, is the LSU game. I think because the way the schedule is set up, not where they're playing a tough game first week like they have the last 3 years, which kind of has screwed Billy a little bit. I mean, he's 1-2 in those games. And so, now that he's got Long Island to start the season, it's basically a practice game. And then you got USF, which Florida should win that game. I like USF in it, especially if Byram is full and healthy and ready to go. Then this should be a competitive game, but I still think Florida is a better team and should win that game by at least I'd say 7 to 10 points as of right now. And you never know. USF plays Boise State first game, and I might change my mind after that if USF beats Boise State. Maybe I'm feeling USF a lot, but I think that LSU game after those first 2 games, Florida should be 2-0. It's the first SEC game. Some Florida fans are not happy with the fact that this game is early. I like it early. It used to be.
Sorry, you heard me. I'm sorry. LSU is always a October game, and the one I hate the most is Tennessee at the end of the year. The rivalry is literally called the third day in September, and we're playing it in November. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but the thing is also, Ian, you got to remember, after this year, we're not playing Tennessee. Right
I
now.
know.
So it's I get it, but at the same time, I don't know. I don't have a problem with games moving. I don't. I think really the only game that or games that you've really kept solidly in the same spot in the schedule is third game in October, which is Tennessee, Alabama. Every other game moves for the most part, except for rivalry week, which most of those Ohio State, Michigan, Auburn, Alabama, Florida State, Florida usually is the last week of the schedule.
Florida, Georgia too has always been Halloween time.
Too. Yeah, it's been around Halloween.
They've kept around at least there. I mean, it's the day after Halloween this year.
Yeah, it moves just depending on where the schedule
Saturday falls.
Yeah, so no, I just feel like this LSU game, it's super important because I get what you're saying about Miami, but I feel like they can lose that Miami game and it not being the end of the world because it's a non-conference game. I don't think that Florida is going to be a contender for the SEC championship game, but I feel like the SEC games have more weight right now. I feel like that Miami doesn't have as much weight. It was proven last year they were 10-2, and there was no talk of them being anywhere near the playoff. And, I don't know. It's just, I just feel like they're going to give more weight to, if you beat an LSU, if you beat an Ole Miss, if you beat a Texas A&M, it's going to give you more gravitas on your resume. And, no offense to Miami. It's just really, it's honestly their schedule. If Miami had a more difficult schedule, I think more people would think more highly of them. But right now, because the ACC is so weak and they're non-conference outside of, USF, yeah, it's better, but and Florida, it's that's about it. But it's I don't know, just their conference schedule is rough. It's just not up to any other standard, an SEC. Florida has 7 ranked opponents that they're playing this year. Mm-hmm. I don't think Miami even has 3 on their whole schedule. And, it goes a long way. It really does for proving your team and your worth. And I just feel like this LSU game, it's in Baton Rouge, it's the first SEC game for the Gators. And I feel like if they win that game, it sets the tone for the entire year. Literally, they are on the winning side of things already. And even if they lose a game or 2 here or there, that it feels like it's a huge jump compared to the last several years where Billy has struggled to take momentum off the jump. They beat Utah in that first game in the first year and then struggled against Kentucky and struggled against USF. And then, last couple of years, they lost the first game. Last year, obviously the calamity of that beginning of the year last year, it just needs to start better. Like if Billy can start better, there's a chance that they can actually have a very solid year. And I think there is. There is belief here. Like we talked about it, the D line, they have not had the depth of D line there in years, and the O line. Both the trenches are hugely important, and it is such a night and day difference from where the roster was when Billy took over after Dan Mullen got fired, and where it is now. It's just amazing. I'm grateful that Billy is focused on recruiting, especially recruiting high school players, and stayed away from the portal for the most part, especially last year where they only took I think it was 4 or 5 players. And, it is a difference between other schools because a lot of these other schools like LSU took I think 15 transfer portal players. And, it hasn't worked out for most teams to rely on transfer portal players. I think the highest number of players taken from the portal that a team that has won a championship has been 6 or 7 or something like that. So you have to limit that because development does help. If you have players there in your building for 3 or 4 years, they're more than likely going to be, developed pretty well. And I like what Billy has done. His evals are, they're up there with anybody as far as evaluations for recruiting and development. Look what he did for Ricky Pearsall. He came in from Arizona State and became a first-round pick. He got Chimera DK. He turned into a decent pick and now is getting some burn with the Titans. And, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff to not like about Billy. There's a lot of things that you can point to and being there's deficiencies. They've messed up on game day infrastructure as far as, dealing with timeouts and dealing with special teams blunders and dealing with penalties and different things. But what I will say that Billy has done correct, that has led me to believe in him, is the culture at Florida, the relationships he has with these kids, coaching them up. It is something that feels like can pay off, and it seems to be paying off. And, I don't know about necessarily this year being a year where they go 10-2 or 11-1. I don't think that's this year. I think that they're right there. They're close to that. And with the schedule getting easier next year, I believe the next 2 years are really their window to really take advantage of a little bit of a softer schedule. Like I said, they're going to get Missouri. They're going to get South Carolina without Lenore Sellers. They're going to get Vandy. They're going to get Arkansas, Auburn. There's a chance, instead of this year where there's 7 ranked teams, next year it's going to be 3 or 4. And that's a real big difference. That's half of the weight of the schedule there. It makes it harder, so they can't go 9-3 with that schedule and think that they're going to make the playoff. But at least if they go 10-2, they should be in. So let's I'm trying to think what else we can do talk-wise about this preview. Let's talk about injuries a little bit. So Dallas Wilson got hurt the other day. He's out for a week or 2 with a lower leg injury. They haven't said specifically what. DJ was banged up right at the start of fall camp. He's dealing with the shoulder issue as well. He also had, I believe, a hernia issue that I'm not exactly sure I haven't heard it talked about too much. I know he's just had some, injury health-wise he's been dealing with for a while. The hamstring obviously last year limited him, but he is throwing. He was back earlier this week throwing, and he looked really good. The throws looked, really good on air though. So it's just him and a receiver that hasn't been, him behind the D line throwing. So we'll see. But do these injuries scare you a lot? Are you worried about? I mean, I have to talk about it because it seems to be the only thing anyone is talking about with this team.
So obviously injuries will scare anybody's senses because that's your whole starting lineup gone. If you're not scared of injuries, ask an Atlanta Braves fan now how they're doing this year. Yeah. Obviously with Lagway, he had that issue. He got injured and was kind of fighting through it through the end of the year. But, I mean, obviously it didn't show towards it. And Dallas Wilson, the weeks he is missing, this is the weeks he's going to be missing practice and all that. It's not any games. The health will be a main thing because obviously this offense plays better with Lagway.
Yeah.
And then you had, your 5-star weapon in Dallas Wilson. Wilson, I don't think is going to be like obviously the 1 or 2 yet. I think obviously Eugene Wilson, if he stays healthy, he was out most of last year. If Eugene Wilson stays in there, he will be, the number 1. And then Dallas Wilson will likely be the 3 or 4. But he's clearly extremely talented and will really be a benefit if he is healthy. Obviously, the more healthy you are, the better. I would say the only thing I am cautious about is how often this happens, especially because if Lagway does go down, the thing is not saying they're completely lost behind them like they were last year. They did get Harrison Bailey. If that name sounds familiar, he was a huge recruit. He was the last big recruit that Jeremy Pruitt got from Tennessee. So he's transferred in. He's going to be the backup this year. If, DEFCON 1 scenario happens with Lagway, he'll step in. Bailey's a good quarterback, but obviously not to the level of Lagway. So, yeah, injuries would be a concern in how often they happen. It's just going to come down to that conditioning because they are going to get hit. They are going to get banged up. Getting hit in the SEC is way different than in high school. So it's about gritting your teeth, toughing it out, and trying to minimize as much damage as you can to these players because it is a long season and they're going to take a lot of bumps and a lot of hits. And that's where the offensive line comes in. You've got to protect your players to make sure that you are, not, breaking them like fine china.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's the topic du jour right now to talk about Lagway's injury health, and I just wanted to bring it up because it's going to be talked about, and it's definitely something that has to at least be broached. But as far as because this offense, that's the other thing. It's one thing where it's it's not only like you said, the DJ, yeah, he may get hurt here or may his health may be an issue, but Harrison Bailey might play, which I'm not too concerned about because he does have talent, more so than Aiden Warner, and also some people are worried about. I'm not as worried. I think Harrison Bailey, if he comes in for a game or two, I think he should be fine. Also, the talent level on offense is way, way higher than it ever has been in the last. I mean, someone posted the other day on Twitter the comparison of the rosters from the last several years and what the wide receiver core was looking like, and compared to now, where you've got Nashawn Montgomery, you've got Dallas Wilson, and you've got Vernell Brown III, and those 3 are coming in. That adds to the depth that you have with Aiden Mizell, J. Michael Sturdivant, the transfer from UCLA, who I got to see out here, and with Eugene Wilson as well. There is a lot of talent on this wide receiver core. And that's not including the running backs, which, Jaden Baugh, man, the kid's a stud, and I cannot wait to see again this year. Then you got Jacoby Jackson there too. Trey Webb just got hurt, so he may be on the back burner a little bit. But then you got Katie Daniels to come in there for the third spot. Tight end wise, you've got Hayden Hansen, you've got Livingston. So they're fine there. I'd like to see the tight end. I can't remember his name offhand. I think it's Jackson, who is talented, but just has not seen a ton of action yet. But yeah, there is across the board. This is the most talent that Billy has had on offense. And, I know there's been talk about Russ Callaway, the offensive coordinator for Florida, if he's going to unleash with these guys. I don't know what to make of it, because it's like Billy has been very conservative as far as most of his scheming up is. He'll have the 2 wideouts and 2 tight ends, and it's the plotting, crossing routes that really don't do much. I don't know. Maybe that's over with. Maybe Russ Callaway is going to be like, hey, we're going to do 4 wide here. We're going to go empty sets. We're going to do something here. I want to see it. I mean, I know you've played the football game, and you're used to doing that. But I also will say Billy is a really talented run game schemer, and he's done very well of drawing up tremendous run plays that have done, huge explosive results. Look at Trevor Etienne compared to what he did last year at Georgia to what he did at Florida. And I don't know for sure. I'd have to look at his explosive between the both, but I don't remember too many explosives from Etienne last year at Georgia compared to his 2 years at Florida, where there was a ton of explosive plays that he had in his freshman and sophomore year. And that credit to Billy, because Billy is able to scheme up those plays, but he's just not as talented to scheme up off passing plays. And I don't know if it's just something that maybe they were reluctant to do because they didn't have someone like Lagway to be able to run it. You saw with Lagway more of a vertical threat, the deep passes. Badger had a ton of 30, 40-yard catches, and I think that's possible. J. Michael Sturdivant could definitely take advantage of that in this offense. And you can also see, Aiden Mizell, the kid's a burner. He's super fast. And, if you get him in open space, he's gone. And I don't know. I just feel like this offense, with the offensive line, with the pieces that they have, I think they should score at least 30 plus points a game. I think they should do better than the 60th spot that they were in last year. I think they're definitely in a top 30 offense. I think that's definitely possible. I saw some saying that they're a top 10 offense. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that would have to be, I don't know. They'd have to score a lot on even really good teams, and I don't think that's going to necessarily happen. But I still think they're going to score a ton in some of these easier games, and that'll kind of push the average up. But okay, so let's talk about the defense a little. What do you feel about the secondary? I know, obviously we talked a little bit about the D-line. I love their linebackers, but secondary wise, what are your thoughts on the secondary?
So secondary, like I mentioned earlier, it was a very big deal that they were able to get the takeaways that they could. Bryce Thornton is coming back. He had 3 interceptions. He led the team in that. So that is a huge, piece coming back. Jordan Castell, Devin Miller, they will be, complementing the secondary is Devin Moore. Devin Moore is returning as well. So we're going to be seeing a lot of consistency from the secondary and a lot from the defense as well. That's the thing, is that there wasn't that much turnover. I mean, yeah, guys graduated and we had, guys transfer, but it wasn't as like this mass exodus that we've maybe seen from other years. And the secondary mainly was still intact. Like I said, guys like Castell, it's a big deal to have them and more to be lockdowns. And if Thornton can just play that backfield, center field position and be able to pick those balls off, it's going to be huge for the second, just for the defense in general. Eliminating the air threat is going to be a big deal for the Gators, because if you make that, offense one-dimensional, because the defensive line, in my opinion, is the real strength of the defense for the Gators this year, because all of them are coming back. You've got, Tyreek Sapp, who was an absolute monster. You have Gums, who, had 5 sacks, planted a flag. And Jamari Lyons, you have an absolute beast for that 3-3-5 setup. You have your 3 big defensive linemen right there that have proven that they can make the offensive linemen's jobs that much harder. So if the secondary steps up, eliminates those passing lanes in the cover 2 and zone coverages, at the very least, make sure they don't play behind them. Like beginning of the year, it was night and day. There were so many times they're getting beat and they were like trying to jump on a play, but once they started having the receivers come to them and then attack, it was a world of difference that we saw from the defense at the end of the year, and that's how they were able to get those stops. How they do, if we see more games like they played against Ole Miss and LSU, and less like how they did against Texas A&M and Miami, then the defense will really be able to bail out the offense sometimes. Florida, I mentioned too in my article, the Gators have not had in the SEC, when it's been 12 or 14 teams now, or I'm sorry, 16 or 14 teams, they have not had a top 5 defense since 2019. And even then, they haven't been in the top 10 since 2020. So there needs to be a step up. And like we saw from the whole team last year, there was progress. They were getting those stops. They were bending, not breaking. Sure, I would like them to stop them before they cross the 40-yard line, but beggars can't be choosers. If they can just have more of a pushback against these teams, it'll be much, much easier for Florida to win these games.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think. I just saw something. Someone was making fun of it was Cam Jordan for the Saints was making fun of Grantham and saying he was like the worst D-line coach they ever had. And I'm just amazed that guy kept getting jobs when he was obviously not very good at it. And, when Mullen took over, there was still a ton of defensive talent on that team. And so, Grantham didn't look as bad to start off with because there was so much talent that, it was doing good. But then as time went on and Mullen wasn't recruiting as well, there were deficiencies and they just were, man, it got so bad. I mean, that 2020 defense, if it had just been, like a top 40 defense, Florida probably wins the title that year because their offense was so potent. And, it's a shame because, it wasted, Kyle Trask's like best season ever as a Florida quarterback. And, but no, Grantham was terrible. And it's just been kind of like no man's land for these defensive squads. They've struggled. Even last year that it was better, it was still in the 60s, and like they still were not great. And so, they needed to, turn it around. I know those games the Miami A&M and the Texas game kind of inflate the stats because, again, it was struggling offensively, and it, collectively it led to them looking worse. But again, they were not getting off the field. They were not forcing turnovers. I don't think in the Miami game, I don't think there was a single turnover that they forced. And, the later games, you saw that they were starting to force turnovers. They were starting to get off the field. They were still allowing the, LSU and Ole Miss to move the ball a decent amount, but they made plays when needed. They got fourth down stops. I think it's a work in progress. I think that they are better now than they were a year ago. And, going into the season gives them hope that they can be, a top 40 defense, which if their offense is good enough, then it should be good enough to keep them in every game. And, like we said, D-line should be ferocious, should be able to, get some sacks. I really like the linebackers a ton. I think it's probably the best linebacking core Florida's had in eons. I can't remember this good of a linebacking core. Miles Graham, Childs, Jaden Robinson. Those guys are studs. All three of them are just amazing linebackers. Pup Howard, all four. Like they just amazing players. And, with the secondary, I think what needs to happen is the younger guys that are coming in from this class, Lagonza Howard and I can't remember the other guy's name, but some of the other guys are filling in, and then also maybe the emergence of Cormani McLean. That'll be something huge to see if he's able to really finally make something of himself, and I think he can. He's put on a lot of muscle over the last year or so, especially with this strength and conditioning coach who's really turned it around for a lot of these players. And, I think Kermani has a chance to really make a difference on this team. Devin Moore obviously is solid. Got to stay healthy. I like Jordan Castell. I like Bryce Thornton a ton. I like Aaron Gates. Man, Aaron Gates, we haven't even talked about at the nickel. Man, Aaron Gates, he just makes plays. He really does. The kid he was all over the field, causing turnovers, in the backfield, tackles for loss. Just the kid is just got a knack for getting after the ball. It is definitely, in year 4, Billy tried to turn around this roster, and it really feels like it is. From the day he took over in 2021 to what this roster is now is night and day. It is a completely different roster. And, I'm excited for that because, I know people have talked about it where it's even if Billy doesn't make it, this team is in way better shape than it was 3-4 years ago. And so, the program now has the facilities, seems to have the NIL stuff in order. They're getting the recruiting, and it has to pay off though eventually. And I think this year. We'll see. Do you have any final thoughts before we go?
I mean, cautiously optimistic. That's going to be my motto for this year. Is I wouldn't put a lot of rankings have them at 13, 14 maybe. I said if I were to be honest, I'd put them at 19 to start because while they finish strong, they need to prove themselves going up the rankings. But again, if it was any other schedule, I would be they could, if they had a Big 12 or ACC schedule, I'd be they could probably rattle off 9 or so wins. But it's a beyond brutal schedule again, and it's just the nature of the beast in the SEC. And I'll say though, some with my uncle. I know I talk about the schedule and how brutal it is a lot, and a lot of people do, and how they play. The hypothetical. Oh, if we had these team schedules, it'd be easier. It's not going to get any easier. You are in the SEC. You're going to be playing tough games every week. So you need to start finding a way to win against these teams. If you want to win national titles and SEC championships back in Florida, you got to beat these teams.
Yeah, I totally agree. Last thing before we go, what do you got prediction-wise? I know you probably did it in the article. And by the way, his article will be up later tonight. Tonight is Friday, August 8th. So it'll be up on our updated website, which we now went with Squarespace. So it's a little bit cleaner look. But Ian, what is your prediction for this year?
So I did put in the prediction in my article. Again, cautiously optimistic, but not wanting to like overstep like how many wins they could. I did say 7-5. Only for there are games that I feel like, yeah, probably aren't going to win those. And I have a very, very bad feeling, and I hope I'm wrong. One of those games that they should win, they might not be able to finish the job, but I'm got my fingers crossed that I won't be wrong. If those games I mentioned, those 4 games, Texas, Georgia, LSU, and Ole Miss, if those, depending on how those go, the only losses, I'm not going to be happy, but I'll be like, I'll understand, and we could work on another step forward from next season. I will be okay with that. But I'm going to say right now 7-5.
Yeah, and I feel like that is the floor right now, 7-5, 6-6, somewhere around there. And I feel like the ceiling for this team is 10-2. And I don't think they're going to get the ceiling, but also my prediction last year was 8-4. So I feel like they're going to improve this year, and I feel like improving is 9-3, and that improving gets them in the playoff, which that is the most important thing, regardless of, yes, SEC championships, but nowadays, if you get in the playoff and you get on a burner, you get on a heater, you got a chance of winning it all. So, and a chance to have a home playoff game, which would be out of this world. I mean, can you imagine being in the swamp for a playoff game, Ian? Like,
yeah,
it just, yeah,
that'd be fun.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like 9-3 is possible. They're gonna probably lose 1 or 2 games early, and then if they just can ride the wave, I feel like, and I'm calling it now, I feel like they had Georgia on the ropes and it was a close game even to the very end. I feel like they can beat Georgia this year. The talent level is not exactly even, but it's close now. And I think it's close enough now that Florida is in striking distance. And I think quarterback-wise, I like Lagway over Gunnar Stockton, and that's why I would give Florida the edge. And I feel like Florida can beat Georgia this year. And so if they beat Georgia, they lose to like Texas, they lose to maybe Miami, which I don't want them to, but it's likely just because it's on the road, and I feel like Miami's got their number for some reason. And then maybe like a loss to like Ole Miss on the road. And so that would be 9-3, and then winning the rest of their games. And maybe like a flip-flop that Ole Miss in Texas. So instead they I think it's possible. I think 9-3 is right there. It's a sweet spot. And if they get in the playoff, I think everyone in Gator Nation is going to be happy, regardless if they win a playoff game or not. I think people will just be happy to be in the playoff. And so Billy will survive another year. And then, the recruiting will come back again. They'll refuel the roster, and, it'll be even better next year. And like I said, the schedule gets easier. So they will be able to take advantage of it.